Hey there everyone, Mr. Lewis here, ready to continue Unit 8 in AP HuG today as we begin our discussion on industrial development. And really, the only place to begin that discussion is with the Industrial Revolution. So take a moment, pause this video lecture, and watch the clip below so that you can pause, rewind it, take notes if you like, and then come back and we will continue the video lecture. Now, what you'll have learned from the video is that in the early 1700s, there are all these different changes occurring in England that help contribute to the onset of the Industrial Revolution. One of those changes is the Second Agricultural Revolution. New farming technology, new strategies, expanded mechanization, all these things lead to improved food supplies, better diets for people, longer lives, a bigger population. Unfortunately, there's less of a need for these people on the farms now because of the changes we mentioned above. And instead, they're forced to move to towns and cities in search of gainful employment. So we have workers leaving the farms and moving into the factories, leaving the primary sector and moving into the secondary sector. One of the key items we see listed in Rostow's stages of development. Some other contributing factors are new resources that are easily found and are being incorporated into the development process, things like coal and iron. New inventions, different types of engines, for example, or different processes that are used in industrial development that generate greater profits for entrepreneurs. One of those very profitable industries we find in England is the textile industry. And to produce textiles, you need cotton. And this gets into British expansion that we'll start to see take place over the next couple hundred years following the beginning of the Industrial Revolution as the British look for more resources around the world. Things like cotton or coal or iron, which is plentiful in a place like Australia, and we start to connect the dots between colonialism, British expansion, and industrial development. And if you take a look at this video here showing us British expansion throughout the 1600s into the 1700s and into the 1800s, it starts to make a lot more sense why they would have expanded into the regions that they did when you look at the resources that are naturally found in those regions, in those countries. But we'll take a little bit closer look at that later on in this unit. Let's go back to England, back to the UK. After the UK starts to develop industrially, of course, diffusion takes place. And all of the benefits associated with industrial development are also things that are sought after in the countries near the UK. So they learn about this industrial development stuff and the resources and inventions that go into it and the improved quality of life that comes from it as well. And of course, industrial development catches on. And so by the mid-1800s, places like France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Luxembourg, Switzerland, they're developed as well, industrialized specifically. By the late 1800s, places like Italy, Austro-Hungary, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, they're industrializing too. And by the late 1800s, we also see some industrial development in places like Spain, Portugal, Southeast Europe as well, but not quite to the extent that we've seen some of these other countries industrializing. But regardless, industrial development diffuses throughout Europe during the 1800s, from the UK on out, all the way to the edges of Asia and Africa. Eventually, crude oil comes into the picture. It's not long after industrial development begins to diffuse throughout Europe that scientists and industrialists realize crude petroleum can be used in the industrial process, not just as energy, but also in many other capacities. And so commercial drilling begins in the mid-1800s and becomes very, very profitable, as we've discussed. By the late 1800s and into the early 1900s, now we're getting into what's called the second industrial revolution. Things like the telephone are invented, electrical power becomes ubiquitous around developed countries, meaning it's everywhere, and transportation speeds up life. Henry Ford begins to use the assembly line in 1913, and as cars become cheaper to produce because of the assembly line, people can afford them more easily, and cars are another item that become quite ubiquitous. All of a sudden, they're all over the place, and we're building roads and highways, and life today as we know it is heavily based on this invention, the automobile, and not just the automobile, but Ford's production process for the automobile, which was made possible by the assembly line. And speaking of producing things at cheaper costs, this is where Alfred Weber comes in. Alfred Weber and his least cost theory help us not only predict but also understand why different industries developed in different regions. His whole theory, least cost theory, was based on minimizing transportation cost of raw materials, minimizing the cost of labor, and minimizing the cost of transporting the final product. So raw materials, the labor, and the final product. And his theory looks somewhat like this. You've got one resource, you got another resource. Those two resources are used to produce something, and then we have to get that something to the market to sell to people to make money. But it's not that simple. Different types of goods require a different process. There's what we call bulk reducing goods or industries and bulk gaining industries. In the pyramid on the left, the diagram on the left, you can see that one resource is used on the left, another material is used on the right. One is 5 tons, one is 3 tons, but when produced, it actually reduces the bulk down to 2 tons. So we would want the production center to be closer to where we find the resources. Because they're so heavy, we don't want to transport them a very long ways to the production center, right? We want to keep it a short route, produce it, and then once it's produced and it's less bulk than we had before in its raw state, then we'll take it to the market and make a bunch of money. On the other hand, if the materials actually weigh less than the final product, in the diagram on the right, we have one resource that weighs 2 tons, another one that weighs only 1 ton, but when produced they weigh 3, then we would be willing to transport the raw materials a greater distance, and then once they gain their bulk, we only have to bring them a very short ways to the market to make that money. So that's bulk reducing versus bulk gaining. For bulk reducing industries, we want the production closer to the raw materials. With bulk gaining industries, we want production closer to the market. Now, there are a couple of key takeaways or consequences from Weber's least cost theory. One is the development of single market manufacturers, businesses that are specialized to the point where they are truly only serving one particular market with only a few customers. And that can be a dangerous position for a business to be in if the demand of those customers changes. The other major consequence of least cost theory is agglomeration. Agglomeration occurs when interrelated businesses, companies that are tied into the same industries, develop in close proximity to one another to reduce cost, which makes sense. But the economy in that area becomes heavily based on that particular industry. And if things change, for example, if the demand for the products produced in that industry goes down, we can also see deglomeration occur, which can lead to population collapse. As far as agglomeration goes in the United States, the auto industry is a perfect example. We have a few different auto companies that you'll probably recognize, like General Motors, Ford, Nissan, Suzuki, Kia, Hyundai, Toyota. that all have operations in Detroit, Michigan. And throughout history, Detroit, Michigan has become a heavily agglomerated area because of the auto industry. These are motor vehicle parts manufacturing establishments in the United States. So all of these red dots have 0 to 5 establishments. The orange dots have 6 to 16, yellow 17 to 41, light green 42 to 91, and dark green 92 to 180. And you can see that dark green color with a lot of yellow and orange and a ton of red in Detroit, Michigan, and in general in the Great Lakes area, including Northwest Indiana, which is where we are. The economies in this region, in these cities, in these states, are heavily based on the auto industry. And agglomeration occurred as a result throughout the past 100 years or so. But we find that deglomeration can also occur, not just around the world, not just in the United States, but right here in Northwest Indiana. And so today, to end this section of notes in this video lecture, I'd like you to take a look at this video explaining the deglomeration of Gary, Indiana, and some of the reasons behind the population collapse in Gary, Indiana. Hopefully, that will highlight some of the reasons that agglomeration or deglomeration might occur, and you'll see some of the downsides, some of the risks of agglomeration, and of course, some of the negative consequences that come with deglomeration. So take a look at that clip to end today's lecture. I appreciate your time as always, and we will pick this back up tomorrow as we move forward with Unit 8. All right, thank you. See you next time. Bye.